I believe God is keeping me alive for that purpose, to keep this world from acquiring amnesia. Someone has to talk about it, and there's so few of us left alive.
Welcome to the podcast, Ben. Thank you so much for coming on. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? First off, how old you are, where you come from, all those things.
Yes, Joe. I come to you from an era in history where civilization lost its humanity, its heart. I think when there were only three kinds of people in this world. There were the killers, the victims, and the bystanders. Now knows that the whole world knew what was happening to the Jewish people, but it chose to be silent, giving Hitler carte blanche to do with them anything he wished. And he did. 6 million of us, 1.5 million of whom were children, and the world was silent.
How old were you during the Holocaust?
Okay, I was born in Kraków, Poland, and I was at the age of almost 11, 10 and 3/4, when the war broke out. And our whole world changed. We lived in a beautiful city, and my father had two businesses, a wine and syrup business, and he also had a chocolate factory. He was the first one to manufacture chocolate-covered wafers in Poland, something like Kit Kat, only the shape of little animals, bears, rabbits. And every time my father would come home, us kids would search his pockets. He made sure he always had some goodies in there. When the war broke out, the buildings that we lived in, a 3-story apartment house, started to shake and rattle like an earthquake. I ran to the window to see what happened, and I saw, by the way, these 3 windows on the ground floor, those 3 windows are part of our apartment. And the other side of the gate, there was another Jewish couple, a young couple with 2 daughters, younger than I, and the mother gave birth to an infant little boy about 2 months earlier. This whole building started to shake and rattle. I ran to the window, and what I saw was tanks were rolling down the street. Following the tanks, there were half-tracks, and every few steps, a soldier would jump out of the half-track, get on the sidewalk, and this is how they occupied the city. There was no fighting, and following them were the Wehrmacht with their shiny black boots and their goose steps. It was quite impressionable for an 11-year-old kid. This is my family, my father Lazar, my mother Shari, Moishi, my oldest brother, Lola, lesser, she is my sister. Goldie is my older sister on the bottom. The middle picture is me at the age of 12. Tuli is my little brother, Tuli. Out of the family of 7, only 2 of us survived, Lola and I. The rest of the family were all slaughtered by the Nazis. My whole body shivers when I think of my family. Wonderful, wonderful people.
I am so sorry. I mean, that's my children's age. My son is right about the age that you were at then.
Things started happening right away. The 5th day of occupation of Krakow, a truck pulls up to our gate full of soldiers, and they started to bang on the gate at 5 a.m. The super came running out with his shirt tail hanging out. Well, what's going on? All they wanted to know is where the Jewish people lived. And he was quick to oblige. He showed our apartment and our neighbor's apartment. They came running then and breaking down the door. In their hands, they had sacks, open sacks, and they were pistol whipping us to throw in all our valuables, money, gold, silver, anything of value. And while they're pistol whipping my father to open up the safe, we hear a terrible screaming from our neighbor's apartment. My sister Lola and I went right through the kitchen door into the yard and into their kitchen door, and this is what we saw. This monster was holding the infant little boy by its legs and swinging it and yelling to the parents, make him shut up. The parents and the daughters are screaming, our baby, don't hurt our baby. With a smirk on his face, you can see he was enjoying what he was doing. He smashes the baby's head into a doorpost, killing it instantly. It's a memory I will never forget. It's always with me, seeing that infant, screaming infant, and the sudden silence of what came out of his head. We jumped on this monster, and the other soldiers heard something was going on. They came running in. They pulled us off him, and they were a little shocked to see it themselves. They said, okay, Hans, let's go. So they gathered up all the valuables they were able to get from us, threw it in a sack, and threw it in the truck and took off. That was the 5th day of occupation. From that day on, things started happening fast and furious. The Jewish people had to wear a Star of David on their arms from the age of 4 on up. Curfew. You couldn't be on the street after 7 p.m. or in 7 a.m. And the strange thing is, if you disobeyed any of their orders, there was one punishment. They would shoot you. And every morning you see dead people laying on the street. There were no judges, no juries, nothing. They just kill you. They had no accountability. A new order came in that the Jewish people may no longer reside in Krakow, but they gave us a choice. If you wanted to stay in Krakow, you had to go inside a ghetto. I hope you know what the ghetto is. Terrible.
Yes.
You had to go inside the ghetto but if you didn't want to go into the ghetto, you had a choice. You could go to a small community outside Krakow, but you cannot be in a big city. My father was preparing to go into the ghetto. My father's family, numbering over 200, all went into the ghetto. While my father is packing, a young man walks up to him by the name of Michael Lieber. He says, Mr. Lesser, you know how I feel about Lola, your daughter Lola. I'm in love with her. Someday I'd love to marry her, but please come to the same community where my father and I are moving to, a town called Niepolim. My father gave him a choice to go into the ghetto or Niepolimice. He chose Niepolimice. That was a miracle one, because all the people who went into the ghetto were pulled out of the ghetto 3 or 4 months later, taken in cattle cars into Belzec. Belzec was an extermination camp, and everyone from the ghetto was slaughtered. So if I had gone into the ghetto, I guess he wouldn't hear my voice today. In Niepołomice, my father, while he was packing, we found out, of course, my father's businesses were both confiscated. And you couldn't recognize my father when he came home and from his wine and syrup and chocolate factories, they chased him away. But while loading, we find out that my father had 1,000 American dollars that he saved up for a rainy day. He took the money and he pasted it in a religious book between the pages, and he put it in a sack full of other books. And we're now leaving Krakow. About an hour outside the city, we're being stopped. Halt! And 2 husky Nazis jump on the wagon. All they wanted to know, do we have any Jewish literature? books. And they saw two sacks full of books. They picked them up and heaved it on the side of the road. They had a mountain full of books from everyone who had to cross the road. Anyone who did not go into the ghetto had to cross that road, and they were confiscating these books. They were going to have a bonfire after everybody left. My sister Lola spoke a beautiful German. She walks up to him. She says, "Look, my father is a writer. He wrote his autobiography. Let him keep this one book." Of course, she realized which book she meant. And he looked at her. He says, "Okay, I'll give you 5 minutes." Maybe he liked the way she spoke German. "I'll give you 5 minutes so you can find it." The whole family started to climb on a mountain of books. All these books look alike, brown or black, leather bound. We keep sliding down. 5 minutes passed, he chased us away. We didn't find the book. You couldn't recognize my father. My father. They were going to have a bonfire to burn all these books. My father coming to a new community. He doesn't have a penny to his name. He has a family of 6 to feed. Not like you can get a job. Jewish people are not allowed to be hired. Michael heard what happened to my father, so he went ahead and he brought my father a sack full of flour, 100 pounds of flour, figuring he'll be able to bake bread and to feed the family. Michael found a farmhouse. This is the farmhouse. By the way, all these pictures, my sister Lola was an artist. She's the only one who survived. She painted those 5 years after the war from memory. So we lived in half of the house. In between our apartment and his, the apple orchard farmer, there was a baking oven. So now Michael gave this flour, figuring he'll be able to bake bread to feed the family. When my father saw the flour, his face lit up. Instead of baking bread to feed the family, he started to bake pretzels. Then he took the pretzels to the neighboring bar and offered it for sale. It was a novelty, and they started to buy the pretzels. Now my father became a little baker in that community. I remember I was 12 years old and I was baking with my father. To this day, I still bake certain things that I remember baking with my father. This lasted about a year, and Lola marries Michael. They move into a duplex. By the way, this is the guests that came to the wedding. Out of all these people, there's only 3 of us who survived. Michael and Lola and I, right here, I am. This little boy is my little brother, leaning against my mother. None of these people survived. They just the 3 of us only. Michael and Lola move into a duplex. The owner of the duplex happened to be a mayor of Neapolomice. One night he comes home, he says, "Michael, Lola, save yourselves. I heard a rumor there is going to be a raid against the Jewish people tonight or tomorrow night." Michael heard that. He went out and he hired a wagon with the driver, and we snuck out in the middle of the night. The only place we can go to was the nearest city called Bochnia. Bochnia had a ghetto. That meant we had to go inside the ghetto. Bochnia Ghetto had a very bad reputation. What happened? Every so often, 2 or 3 dump trucks would come inside the ghetto, and the Nazis would go from house to house, pull out the children from their beds, and throw them into these dump trucks. You can just imagine the parents were screaming for the children screaming for the parents. And as they filled up 2 or 3 dump trucks with children, they would pull out and the parents were running behind these trucks and screaming for their children. But these cultured people had machine guns at the end of each truck, and they would mow down the parents running behind these trucks. This resonated all over Europe. Stay away from Bochnia Ghetto because of these atrocities. But we had no choice. And it's a good thing we did leave, because that night there was a raid, and all the Jewish people were picked up, thrown into trucks, and they took them to the forest. The men were given shovels, they dug a ditch, and everyone was shot. How do we know this? Lola and I survived the war, so we went back to Neapolomice to find out what happened to everybody. And the farmers were telling us, as they went to the forest to pick mushrooms and berries to sell in the market in the morning, they saw these trucks pull in. They were hiding behind trees, and they saw everything that's happening. And they said the ground was moving for 3 days afterwards. They didn't care if they killed you or threw into the graves. Well, now we are in Bochnia Ghetto. The driver unloads us in the middle of the street, and Michael sees a school buddy by the name of Farber, who happened to be a Jewish policeman inside the ghetto. He wore a uniform, but no weapons. All he had is a baton on the side of his leg. So Farber says, Michael, Lola, what are you doing here? And Michael tells him the story that they had to leave Neapolomice. Farber says, don't worry, I'll find you a place to live. He took Michael, his parents, and his sister to some place. And he took my father, my mother, myself, my little brother, the four of us, into a big room. And there were 8 other people inside this room. Now we were 12. No beds. All we had was straw on the ground, blankets on top of the straw, blankets hanging from the ceiling, separating each family. And everybody inside the ghetto had to work. If you didn't work, you didn't receive any rations. I was about 12 and a half or 13. I remember working in a uniform factory. I was sewing on buttons on uniforms. It was an easy job, but it was 12 hours a day, very little sleep and very little food. This went on for over a year. And Farber goes over to Michael and says, Michael, Lola, save yourselves. I heard a rumor that there might be a raid inside the ghetto tonight. Ever since those trucks would come in and pull out the children from their beds, every house and every apartment had a hiding place. They called those hiding places bunkers. So that's when we found out that our bunker was this little ornate piece of furniture where you hang your coats and jackets. You open the door, you push the clothing apart, the back panel would slide apart. There was a hole in the wall, and the 12 of us could crawl through that hole, and the last person would close the door, put the closing back, push the back panel back, and we stood there all night long. We heard screaming, shouting, yelling, shooting, screaming. We heard dogs barking. The dogs were tearing apart our neighbors. We can hear the screams. Towards morning, it got quiet. When it got quiet, we dared to come out. When we came out, we couldn't believe what our eyes are seeing. We saw our neighbors laying in the snow, torn apart by dogs. Many of them were shot. We saw a woman holding an infant dead, but the woman was still breathing. People going around in push carts and picking up these bodies and placing them on those push carts and taking them to the ghetto square, piling them up as high as they could. And these cultured people would come with gasoline cans and pour gasoline over these people. And they started the Bochnia Ghetto human bonfire, a Bochnia Ghetto Square human bonfire. Can you imagine what it was like? I can't even describe it. It was hell on earth. People running and screaming and yelling and hiding and running and hiding and shooting and all this going on and this fire and this smoke. My God. I knew that my sister Lola and Michael were hiding in the doghouse. So I went to the doghouse to find out what happened. It was a doghouse where you picked up the floor. There was a step ladder in a room for 7 people to hide. 7 people could hide inside the doghouse. Michael and Lola are now telling me what happened as they were about to go into the doghouse. Another Jewish policeman by the name of Morris Schiller walks up to them with their mother and his sister. He says, Michael, I know about your doghouse hiding place. Unless you take my sister and my mother along, I'm going to tell the authorities. Well, there was only room for 7. Now they were 9. So Michael and Lola walked away. Michael's mother was running after him. No, you can't. You have your whole life ahead of you. Let me stay away. They wouldn't hear of it. They just walked away. And while they're walking the street, Michael sees Farber, that friendly Jewish policeman. He says, why aren't you hiding something, Michael? You know what's about to happen. He tells him the story about Mauricio. He says, don't worry, where my sister and her 2 children are hiding, there is room for you. Follow me. And he took them to a leather factory, a tannery. Above the tannery, there was a water tank. He says, my sister and her 2 children are inside the water tank. Towards morning, you're going to hear a knock on the tank. That means the coast is clear. You can come out. There's a step ladder. At the edge, there is a rope. You can lower yourself and stay there all night. Michael is telling the story. As they came up, they lowered themselves with a rope. They saw his sister was standing knee-deep in water. His little girl waist-high in water. And the mother was holding a little infant boy asleep, and they were all shaking and shivering. Michael picked up the girl from the floor. Lola picks up the little boy from the mother, and they were all shivering and shaking all night long. There were little water rats swimming and nibbling at their feet. My God, all night long they heard shootings, dogs barking, screaming, just like we heard. Towards morning, it got quiet. There was that knock on the tank. They pulled themselves out, and once they were outside, they got circulation back into their legs. They wanted to go and see what happened to the doghouse, to Michael's family, and they came to the doghouse, and this is what they saw. Everybody from the doghouse laying in the snow with the bullet hole in their head. Little Marika on the corner was holding a doll that Lola made her for her 7th birthday. And of course, when Lola saw that, she started to scream. And Michael stopped her. He says, they may still be burning bodies. They'll hear you. So with a quietly quelched cry, they knew what they had to do. See, according to Jewish religion, you're supposed to bury your loved ones within 12 or 24 hours if you can. Michael and Lola went out and they found the rickety wheelbarrow. They put the whole family on the wheelbarrow. Marika is still holding her doll, hanging down. They took the bodies to the cemetery. There he found a shovel, and Lola, with her bare hands, were pulling out pieces of the frozen ground. They put the family inside, and all of a sudden, Morris Schiller walks up to them. He says, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't his fault because his own mother and his own sister were also killed. However, he says, the graves that you just put your family in there, I want it for my mother and my sister. You're going to have to take everybody out of there. Lola started to cry. Michael said he has the power over us, and they had to pull everybody out, put them back on the wheelbarrow, take them to another spot, and bury them. While this is going on, there is a Jeep coming up the hill, and they stop at the gate of the cemetery. Two husky Nazis jump out, and they scream, Morris Schiller, Morris Schiller. He walks up to them, Jawohl, here I am. They pull out the revolver and they shot him. This is what they did to anyone who had seen too much. I imagine Morris Schiller saw a lot that night. So anyway, everybody was shot. And they went back down the hill with the Jeep. Michael and Lola are holding each other and they're coming down the hill back to their apartment. And they see trucks and with the loudspeaker saying, anyone left in the ghetto has to register in the Unimaginable, in the Jewish police station. If you didn't register, you will not receive any rations. You'll die. So Michael and Lola, my father and I, we all stood in line to get in the Jewish Federation. We stood in line to register. There was a little window. The other side of the window was a Nazi, a soldier. Next to him was a head of the Gestapo for Bochnia. The head of the Gestapo, Bochnia, was sitting in a chair and listening to everything that's going on. My sister Lola went up first. When she came up to the window, they asked her where she lives, her address, her age, where were you born? She says, Munkac. Where is that? Well, Munkac is in Hungary. The head of Gestapo sitting there heard that. He says, stop everything. I want this young woman back in my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. When Lola heard that, she started to cry and she walked away. And the whole family followed her. She walked back to her apartment, crying, shaking. Why would the head of Gestapo want this beautiful young woman to come to his office? She wasn't even 18 years old at the time. You can just imagine. Next morning around 8 a.m., two policemen come to the door. One of them was Farber, that friendly Jewish policeman. He says, okay, Lola, it's time to go. And as they went to the gate of the ghetto to go across the ghetto, the whole family followed, including some friends of ours. We all followed. Lola and the two policemen went outside the gate. We couldn't go. We had to stay inside. And she went a couple blocks. There was a house, a beautiful house. It used to be a Jewish home once. Inside the house, they came in. Lola's telling the story. They came in, they saw a lot of secretaries with typewriters. And at the end of the room, there was a big desk. Behind him was Schönbrück. And when he sees her, he stands up and he pulls out the chair for her to sit down. That was completely out of character, because in those days, if a Jewish person walked down the street and a Nazi would come forward, you had to get off the sidewalk, go around him, pull off your cap, your hat. And here the head of Gestapo is pulling up a chair for a Jewish woman, and he says to her, sit down. He saw she was shaking and shivering and crying. He says, take it easy. No one is going to hurt you here. Don't worry, just sit down. She sits down, and he asked her a question. Are you really a Hungarian citizen? Were you born in Munkac? She says, igen, yes. And she knew everything. He started to question her about goulash, and she knew the recipe, and about Hungarian actors. She knew everything. He puts his hand on her arm, and he pulls down the band with the Star of David. He says, "You are one lucky young woman." She looks at him. He says, "You see, you are a Hungarian citizen. Hungary is an ally of Germany. We're not occupying Hungary. So therefore, we have no jurisdiction over you. You have a right not to wear the Star of David. You don't even have to live inside the ghetto. You can move out and live anywhere you wish." Well, Lola heard, she started to cry for happiness. And he asked her, "What about the rest of your family? Where were they born?" Now, of course, everybody was born in Munkac, which wasn't true. The only ones who were born in Munkac were my mother and my sister, Lola. The rest of the family were all born in Krakow, Poland. He asked Lola to give the names of every member of the family. He told his secretary to type out forms so that everyone that's part of the family is a Hungarian citizen. Therefore, they don't have to wear the Star of David. They don't have to live inside the ghetto. When Lola heard all of that and he made out the papers, she was saying goodbye to him and she kissed his hand. It's very unusual, a Jewish woman kissing a Nazi. She kissed his hand, Dankeschön, Dankeschön, Dankeschön. And they left. They're now on their way back to the ghetto, and we're all waiting outside there, and we see them coming. We see Lola with a smile on her face. We expected her to be in very bad shape, but not smiling. And she comes to the ghetto and she tells the story. She has these papers. Among us, there was a rabbi, a friend of ours, Rabbi Halberstam. When he heard that, he picked up Lola and started to dance with her. He says, "Lola, you're a modern day Queen Esther." Queen Esther is a story after the Jewish people lost the war in Judea. They lost the war with the Romans. The Jewish people, many of them were killed and a lot of them were running all over. So many of them ran to this one country, and there was a king in that country in the Middle East. And the king married a wife who happened to be Jewish, fell in love with a Jewish woman. She found out that there was an ordinance coming out. Tomorrow they're going to kill all the Jewish people in that land. Well, so she talked to her husband, and her husband says, "Who came out with such a law?" So she says his name is Haman. He ordered this Haman to come in, and they hung Haman and his whole family. And the Jewish people were saved. So that was Queen Esther. So when he says, "Lola, you're a modern day Queen Esther," this is what he meant. And she says, "What do you mean?" He says, "You don't know it yet, but you're going to save a lot of Jewish people from being killed." He saw some things that we didn't see. He says, "I'm working with a police station, and he has clean sheets of paper. He has a typewriter. He can duplicate some of these certificates in his typewriter. And he knows somebody who has a rubber ball will take the rubber ball and make a stamp duplicating Schönbrück's stamp. All they need now is somebody to duplicate his signature." My brother, my oldest brother, volunteered to do that. And he became a good forger. And they were making these documents that night in a basement. And we had documents for every one of the family, of course. And they made out for about 55 other people documents. And all of a sudden, this is a few days later, my brother was arrested. They found out he was forging Schönbrück's name. and they arrested Schönbrück, the head of Gestapo, and they executed him for doing what he did. Jewish people are Jewish people. It didn't matter Hungarian, Polish, you're a Jew. So, of course, we were now outside the ghetto. To tell you the whole story would take too long. But we were now outside the ghetto, and Michael befriends a truck driver who was hauling coal. He asked him if he would convert his truck into a double-decker. There'll be coal on top, and between the coal and the chassis, people could hide. And he would take us to the border of Czechoslovakia and Poland, and there would be a smuggler, and he would smuggle us across the border. Anyway, would pay him a lot of money. And he listened to us, and he did convert his truck into a double-decker. Now there was coal on top, and between the coal and the chassis, 10 of us could hide, 5 and 5, just like sardines. The first group of people going were 8 from this one rich family that we helped to come out of the ghetto. And after them, they would allow 2 from our family to go with them. So Michael and Lola went first. Why did they go first? Only because we couldn't trust these drivers. They would take your money up front, and then they would turn you into the SS, and they get paid ransom money for Jewish people trying to escape. They went first, and we made up a password. If the driver comes back with the right password, then you can trust him. Otherwise, don't. Okay? So sure enough, 2 days later, the driver comes back with the right password. Now it was time for another 10 to go in. And my father and mother insisted that I and my little brother go next. Remember, my oldest brother was in jail now. My oldest sister, Goldie, when the war broke out, she was visiting her grandparents in Munka. She got caught there in Hungary. So she was in a free country. But my father just had me and my little brother left. Lola and Michael just went across. Now it was our turn to go into this truck. We were just like sardines, 5 and 5. And 1 hour out of the city of Bochnia, we're being stopped. And we look through the cracks and we see soldiers with rifles. We figured somebody turned us in, and they talked to the driver. And the driver, we didn't hear what he said, but then the truck started to move again. We felt relieved until we see that on the step by the driver's side, there is a soldier with a rifle. Now we hear soldiers walking on top of the coal, and the coal dust is starting to filter through. My little brother is about to sneeze, and I'm holding his nose and his mouth. They were with us for 2 hours, and then the truck stopped, and we figured this is it. They're going to shoot us. All we heard is, Dankeschön, Dankeschön. Thank you, thank you. They were just hitchhiking. Remember talking about miracles. They didn't know there are 10 Jewish people under their feet. 2 hours. What a miracle. And we arrived about 2 hours later. We arrived at the forest. He unloaded us. He told us to go inside the forest. 300 yards inside, there is a tool shed. Inside the tool shed, there is the smuggler. He's waiting for you. Went up there, sure enough, there was the smuggler there who happened to be a forest ranger. The forest ranger was a smuggler. He took us in the middle of the forest, made us lay down. He says, look up. And we looked up and we see soldiers with dogs next to them. And we see barbed wire. He tells us quietly at 3 a.m., they're going to go down the hill and they'll meet other fresh soldiers. They'll have a little ceremony. And then the fresh soldiers come up the hill. There's about 5 or 10 minutes time that you can cross the border if you're quiet. which is what we did. At 3 a.m., we saw them come down. When they were out of our way, out of our sound, we shimmied our way up to the border. He picked up the barbed wire. He says, now look, on the other side of the barbed wire, there is a big ravine, and you can fall down and tumble, it's all over. Sit down at the edge of the mountain, hold hands, and slide down the hill quietly. If you tumble, it's all over. So we sat down at the edge of the mountain, holding hands, and we started to slide down until we hit a plateau. It was pitch black. We didn't see a thing. I asked my brother, are you all right? He says, okay. When somebody taps me on my shoulder, I jump out of my skin. Who in the world? He says, Binish? No one calls me Binish except immediate family. He says, I'm your Uncle Belo, your mother's brother. Who in the world, how did you find me here in the middle of nowhere? He says, when Lola and Michael came across 2 days ago, they contacted us and they told us the exact spot. So I waited here for you. We were so happy. He took us to tell you the story how we had to cross another border. I just don't have that much time. Read my book. In my book, you're going to see everything, living a life that matters. We are now in Budapest, Hungary. We meet Michael and Lola. They waited for us, and we have a meal together. And after that, I had to go into jail to be legalized. So going in jail, they put me in a cell with my little brother. My uncle went up to the office. He signed some papers that he's going to be our guardian. And then a half hour later, they released us to him as guardian. So we were now legal in Hungary. And we boarded the train to take us to Munkacs. Munkacs is where my oldest sister is waiting for me. Munkacs is where my grandparents are, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, the whole family from my mother's side. They were from Munkacs. When we arrived, we had this beautiful reunion. My uncle, who was a rich man, invited me to his house with my little brother. He had 2 sons. He had a yardage goods store. He had fabric store you can buy for suits and dresses. And above the store, he had his house. In Hungary, things were going on like you never knew there was a war ever. People going to weddings, to proms, and sitting in outdoor cafes and laughing and smoking. My God, nothing happened. I tell most of the people what happens in Poland. As much as I know, I didn't know about the death camps. I didn't know about that. If my father knew, he didn't tell us kids. But they didn't believe us. And those who believed, the family, they said, okay, but this will never happen in Hungary because Hungary is an ally of Germany. Why would Hitler send mob soldiers to occupy a friendly country when he needed every soldier fighting the front? And it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense. And I'm waiting for my father and mother to come across 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4, 5. Nothing happened. One man comes across who knows what happened to my parents, and he tells us, as they were about to get inside that truck with coal, a Polish farmer saw what was going on. They called the Gestapo, and they came, they pulled everybody out. And all 10 people, plus the driver, all 11 people were pulled out of the truck, put against the wall, and everyone was shot, including the driver. Everyone was shot. All of a sudden, the Nazis just marched into Hungary like they're invited guests. When they came in, they knew every Jewish person, where they're living. They knew their addresses, they knew their businesses, they knew their education. How? They didn't have computers in those days. IBM had punch cards, and they would sell these punch cards to anyone who would pay the price. IBM doesn't deny it, but they say they had no idea for what purpose they're going to use those punch cards. And they came in, this is what they told the Jewish people: Germany needs workers. You will all be relocated to Germany. Able-bodied men and women will be working, children will be schooled, older people will be cared for. Bring along all your valuables that you can carry, but leave everything else behind. And people believed it. They brought along bundles, and they took us to the railroad station. They lined us up, 80 people to a cattle car. While we were waiting to go into the cattle car, two men with a stretcher walk up, and they set down the stretcher by my feet. And I see a beaten up woman, bloodied, and I look at her clothes. It's my sister, Goldie. I says, Goldie, what happened to you? She tried to escape. She went as far as the railroad station. A Hungarian gendarme who went to school with her recognized her. He turned her into the SS. They beat her to a pulp. Now they order us to go in. So 80 people to kettle car. It wouldn't be so bad, but with the bundles they had, it was so tight that if somebody wanted to sit down, somebody had to stand up. They had 2 buckets of water in the corner. Once the water was gone, there were no sanitary facilities, no toilets. 80 people without a toilet. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, people started to use those buckets, and those buckets would overflow, and the human waste would roll down on the floor. You can't imagine what it was like. It was like unbelievable hell. On the 3rd night, we arrived to Auschwitz. We didn't know that. We didn't know about Auschwitz. And they pulled into a big gate, a yard, and I see on top of the gate, it says, Arbeit macht frei. Labor gives you freedom. Those are the gates of Auschwitz. After 2 hours being inside the gate, the train starts to move again. It went up about 3 kilometers down the road, and it stopped. That place was called Birkenau. Birkenau was part of Auschwitz. Most of the killing was done in Birkenau. And they opened up the doors. It was still nighttime. And they were yelling, leave all your belongings where it is. Don't pick anything up. Women and children to the right, men to the left. Now, Jill, I was about 15 and a half at that time. I wasn't a child anymore, and I wasn't an adult either. But I was holding on to my sister and my little brother, and I just let them go because I figured I'll go with my uncle, my cousin, figuring if this is a labor camp, they want you to labor. Labor, you're going to be fed better. This was my only reasoning. And that was that was the right choice, because had I gone with my sister, my little brother, I wouldn't be here to talk to you. They went directly to the gas chambers. But who knew? And we go forward, and we see a man like a doctor with a white frock and white gloves, and he's going right, left, right, left, right, left. That was Dr. Mengele, the angel of death. He decided who should live, who should die, with a flick of finger. And when I came in front of him, I heard him ask a young man, can you run 5 kilometers, or would you rather go by truck? He said he had a bad knee, he would rather go by truck, not realizing that meant certain death. They sent him to the right. But nobody knows that. Who knew? I shake all over just thinking about this. And then I'm figuring to my, why would he ask such a question? Can you run 5 kilometers? I see the barracks are right here. I figured he's testing us to see if you're strong enough to work. So I tell my uncle, my cousin, whatever he asks you, tell him you're strong, you can run, you're healthy, you can work. But let me go first, I said. Remember, I'm 15 and a half, and I walk up to him straight on my tiptoes, stretch myself up, and I salute him. I said, 18 Jahre alt, gesund und weg. I'm 18 years old, I'm healthy, and I can work. He did ask me, kannst du 5 kilometers laufen? Can you run 5 kilometers? I says, jawohl, yes. And he sent me to the left. My uncle and cousin followed. We all went to the left. They took all of us people on the left, marched us into a big auditorium, just like a school auditorium. And they had soldiers all over there, and they're yelling at us, get undressed, get out of your shoes, walk over to the line of barbers. They'll cut your hair all over, and then go into the showers. Well, picture this. I get undressed, but I had diamonds in my shoes. Did I tell you that? When I was in Hungary, I told my uncle, I says, Uncle, if the Nazis ever come in, they will take everything away from us. It would make sense if you converted some of your assets into diamonds so we can hide it on us. My uncle listened to me, and one day he comes home with boxes full of shoes, a pair of shoes for every member of the family. He tells us, knows that in the heels of the shoes there are diamonds. And he gave us all a pair of shoes. My uncle, who gave us the shoes, got out of his shoes. His son, my cousin, got out of the shoes. I refused. So picture this. I'm naked, just beautiful black shoes on me, and I walk over to these barbers. They cut my hair all over my body, but they don't say anything about my shoes. And the guards are going back and forth and looking at me like God blinded their eyes. They didn't see. Had they seen him, they would kill me. I disobeyed an order. I walk into the showers with my shoes on. They gave us the striped clothes, and the other shoes, they gave us wooden shoes with the canvas on top. I put those shoes with the diamonds under my jackets, under my arms, and they lead us out of the bathhouse to the barracks. The Stubenälteste, the man in charge of the barrack, comes out with a broken German, and I could detect he was a Polish inmate. He says, "Ha, you Hungarian Jews, you think you're here on vacation? Think again. You see those chimneys, those ashes? Those are your mothers, your fathers, your brothers, and your sisters. And if you don't behave and do exactly what you're told, this is how you're going to wind up ashes." I couldn't believe my sister, my little brother, ashes. They chased us in the barrack. We took an upper bunk, and all three of us fell asleep. We were so tired. We fell asleep. An hour later, my cousin wakes me up. "Ben, get up, get up." I says, "What?" He says, "Listen." And I hear a chanting or a humming or a singing or a crying. We can't make it out. And then he says, "Look, one wall had a board missing in it, and we see flames are shooting out." He says, "What is this?" I said, "I don't know, but I'll find out." So I walk over to the Stubenälteste, to man in charge of the barrack, and I speak to him in Polish. "Przepraszam bardzo." I said, "Excuse me, sir, tell me what is going on here." He laughed. He says, "Ha, you Hungarian Jews, you know nothing. Months before Germany occupied Hungary, we in Auschwitz knew they're going to do that because they made us dig 3 fiery pits for the influx of the Hungarian Jews. They knew the trains would line up so fast and furious, they wouldn't be time to incinerate them all. So they made us these ditches. And he told me a lot of other things. But when he told me that, I didn't believe him. I made the biggest mistake in my life. I walked out at night, it was still nighttime, behind my barrack, the next barrack, and I see flames, a big fiery pit, and 3 trucks, and people are picking up people, throwing them into these fiery pits. I saw him pick up a girl with a skirt, screaming, throwing into the fiery pit. That sight never leaves my eyes. I always see it. That's why I made such a mistake. They should have listened. And he was telling me other things. As long as I'm talking about it, I'll tell you some of the things. He was telling me it takes a half hour to kill a person in the gas chambers. But they didn't have our time to give us because the trains were coming in fast and furious. After 15 minutes, they saw everybody was laying on the floor, dead or alive. They would air out the gas chambers for 15 minutes, open the door. The Zone Commando would come in, pull out these bodies, cut their hair, pull out their gold teeth, check their body for any hidden jewels, put them in these gurneys, 5 people in a gurney with a rope on them, push them to the crematorium. But this was too slow of a process. Now they had trucks waiting, and they were throwing in these half-dead bodies into these trucks. And on top of the half-dead bodies, they had children, live children, infants, thrown on top. Apparently, they took some of the children away as they pushed the mother into the gas chambers. They didn't want them to take up space. I don't know. They threw those children on top of the head that have dead bodies, and they took them to these fiery pits and throwing them in like they were trash. And that's the screaming, and that's the sight that won't leave my eyes. Day and night, I see it. 2 weeks, what we went through in Auschwitz is too long of a story to tell you. Again, read my book. It was so terrible. Every morning we had to get up. They call it in selection, appel, naked, standing there. They counted us, and they looked you over. If you were too skinny, they pulled you out and sent you to the gas chambers. Everybody knew that was where they were sending you. So every morning you didn't know if you survived this. Anyway, after 2 weeks, they put us into trucks and they took us to a labor camp called Dachau. Dachau was a rock quarry. As they dynamited the mountain and the boulders would come down, it was our job with sledgehammers to break them into manageable pieces, throw them into mining carts, run it down the hill to grinding machine, then push those carts back up empty. It was back-breaking work. I didn't think my uncle is going to survive this. So I bribed the chef with my diamonds and my shoes to give my uncle a job in the kitchen. He took my diamonds and he gave my uncle a job in the kitchen. It got easier for us because my uncle could eat in the kitchen and they couldn't take anything out. They were searched, but he could share his ration with us because he would eat in the kitchen. This went on every evening when we would come home. We would have to come in the yard, line up in rows of 5, and they counted us. Even the kitchen help had to come out, stand in front of us, and everyone was counted. After everyone was counted, they dismissed us, and we would go and take our rations and go into our barrack. That night, we came home from work, we count, and they count us, and they count us. And the comment comes down with this Fräulein. He says, I'm going to teach these Schweinhund a lesson they'll never forget. What happened? 3 inmates escaped. And because of this, he orders his henchmen to pull out every 10th person in line to receive 25 lashes. As they're counting every 10th person in line, I can see my uncle is going to be a 5 or a 10. So I push him behind me. And sure enough, I was a 10. I took his place. They took us in the middle of the yard, number 10s. They brought down hardwood stakes, 1 by 1 inch, about 2.5 feet long. And they brought down a sawhorse. This is what they ordered us to do. Tiptoe in front of the sawhorse, bend over, where your stomach cannot touch the 2x4, your heel cannot touch the ground, and one man is pulling your trousers, the other one starts to hit, and you have to count out loud. If you miscount it, you start from 1 again. Anytime your heel touches the ground, you start from 1 again. The stomach touches the 2x4, you start from 1 again. It was almost impossible. The first man goes up. He touches the ground, he touches the 2x4. He miscounts and he falls. The minute he falls, the commandant goes over, kicks him in the face, get up. He couldn't. He pulls out a revolver and shoots him right in the temple. As soon as they shoot him, his girlfriend, his Fräulein, walks over to him, gives him a hug and a kiss, like he just performed the heroic act. He killed him. 2 went up the same way. He miscounted. He touched the ground, touched his 2x4. After a while, he falls. He falls. The commandant goes over, kicks him in the face, get up. He couldn't. He pulls out a revolver and shoots him in the temple. We have 2 dead bodies. Ben Lesser is number 4. Now the 3rd one goes up. The 3rd one was a little younger. He also miscounted. He touched the ground with the heel. He touched the 2x4. He yells out, "Please have mercy on me. Don't kill me." The commandant says to him, "Then stand up, come over here and face me." The poor guy stands up, makes 4 or 5 steps. His knees gave out from under him. He falls. The commandant goes over, shoots him. We have 3 dead bodies. The next person in line is Ben Lesser. What can I tell you? I remember walking up to that horse, tiptoe, bend over without touching the 2x4. One man is pulling my trousers, and the other one starts to hit, and I yell out. I must have psyched myself out, because I remember saying to myself, Ben, this is it. If you want to live another 5 minutes, you better do exactly as you're told. And I tiptoe and I went over without touching the 2x4. One man is pulling my trouser and they're hitting us. 10, 11, 12, 20, 21, 22, 23, 25. I made it. You can hear a pin drop in that camp. No one believed that anyone could survive this. I didn't believe it myself. And the man who was pulling my trousers says to me, "Go over and thank the commandant." So I stand up, blood is running down my legs. I walk over to him and salute him. I say, "Danke schön, Herr Kommandant. Thank you very much." When he hears that, he puts his hand on my shirt collar, twists me around, facing the number 10s who are still to be beaten. And he says to them, "Now I told you could be done. If you do it like this, Junge, you have nothing to worry about." While this is going on, there is a commotion at the gate. They caught those 3 inmates who escaped, and they were pulling them in, bloodied. You couldn't recognize them. They were pulling him in. And the commandant, when he saw that, just like a child gets sick of a toy, he throws it away. He told us, number 10, to go back to our lines. We all went back. He told his henchmen to bring down a portable gallows, And we all had to stand there and watch while they're hanging those three men, each one individually. I'll never forget the third man. He was a little younger. He put the noose around his neck. He yells out, Shema Yisrael. That's a Hebrew prayer. Only 6 words. 6 words. When they heard it, they kicked the stool out from under him. They wouldn't let him complete the last 2 words, God is one. They were such sadists. And then they dismissed us like nothing ever happened. We went for our rations and went into the barracks. For weeks, I couldn't lay on my back because of these welts. I had to lay on my stomach. One night we hear cannon fire. The front is closing in. We went to work, reported to work. There was a loudspeaker. No one is working today. The camp is being evacuated. Line up a rows of 5 and walk out of the camp. I'm holding on my cousin's hand, and my uncle was already in the kitchen working. We couldn't say goodbye to him. We never saw him again. We march out. That was called the Death March. They called it the Death March because if you could not keep up pace with the soldiers, they simply shot you. And all day long you heard pop, 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 people being shot. It was unbelievable. Now in my book, you're gonna see I wrote, I marched in the Death March 3 or 4 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
A German professor called my daughter that read my book recently. He said he loved it so much he asked permission to translate it in German, which we gave him permission. However, he says your father made 2 mistakes in his book. What are the mistakes? He says that he was in the Death March 3 or 4 weeks. Mr. Lesser was in the Death March 7 weeks, the 58 kilometers from Dachau to Buchenwald. And he knows. Don't ask me how I survived this. All I remember is the last week, my shoes fell apart. Now we were marching in snow, barefooted, and we had to keep pace with the soldiers with their beautiful black boots. Don't ask me to talk about miracles, how I came to Buchenwald. And they counted us and they told us, go into this barrack, they're going to feed you, you can take a shower there, and you can sleep, we'll give you fresh clothes. This is me inside that shower in Buchenwald. Don't ask how we found this picture with me inside. That's a miracle in itself. That's another story. But we showered, they fed us, they gave us fresh clothes, we slept. Next morning, we got back there and we had to line up, and they counted us and they marched us out. Outside the camp, we see a line of cattle cars. They line us up in the cattle cars, 82 cattle cars. I tell my cousin, I'll push you up. Try and find a spot in the cattle car where we can rest our back. I remember going to Auschwitz and people all around me. It was terrible. He did go in first and he found a spot against the wall. He saved the spot for me. After everybody was in, they closed the door. 2 hours later, they opened the door and they threw in 80 loaves of bread, a loaf of bread for every person. Picture those. Those people who were next to the door were grabbing 4 or 5 breads. I was against the wall with my cousin. We had nothing. All these people against the wall had nothing. We don't know where we're going for how long. I needed to get the bread. So I started to climb over the sitting bodies, and one of the inmates had a pocket knife. He stabs me. I feel a stab. I feel my mouth is filling up with blood, but I need the bread. I keep climbing, and this guy has a bunch of breads. I took a bread away from him, put it in my pocket. He kicked me. I come back to my cousin. He says, Ben, you're bleeding. What's going on? I put my finger here. It went right through my tongue. To this day, I still have a mark. The mark is over my chin bone because I filled up. It was over my throat, but I filled up. It's over my chin bone. It's 80 years old. So I am with one loaf of bread for the two of us. Every midnight, I share with my cousin a piece, the slice of a half an egg for each one of us. And the bread lasted us 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, no more bread, no water, no bread, no water. People are dying all around me. And this train traveled for another week. No bread, no water. We came a week later, we come to Dachau. The train stops and they ordered us, anyone who can walk, get out of the cattle cars, walk over across the tracks into the yard of Dachau. My cattle car had 80 people and only 4 of us walked out alive. My cousin and I and 2 other people. Everybody, 76 people dead. My other mistakes that I made that this professor was telling us is that I said that there were only 3,000 people on that train. He said that train held 6,900, almost 7,000 people. And out of the 7,000 people, only 14 walked out in Dachau alive, 14 out of 7,000. And I am the only survivor today. I was the only survivor the last 5 years already. I remember we came off the train and the night before was raining. There was water inside the track. So the first thing we did, we dropped on the track and we licked the water. My God, they chased us away. And we went into the barrack. We went inside the camp. We see a mountain full of bodies. They ran out of coal. They couldn't burn the bodies in the crematorium, so they piled them up as far as they could. And they put my cousin and I right next to these bodies in one of the barracks. They didn't give us a bunk, just on the floor. They pushed us to the wall, and we were sitting there 1 day, 2 days. Some of the inmates felt sorry for us, so they gave us some water. After 2 days, we hear, liberation, Americans, Americans, liberation. I said to my cousin, let me go out and see, come on. And holding each other, we shuffled out. And we see the inmates are crawling on their hands and knees and kissing the boots of the American GI. They looked like gods to us. They liberated us. Liberation. We're free, whatever that meant. You know, let me just tell you something. I'll tell you first this. When we're standing there, 2 GIs walk up to me and to my cousin. One of them had a can of Spam. He opens up the can of Spam and he hands it to me, and it smelled so good. We made a mistake. We ate some of it. We both came down with dysentery. My cousin dies in my arm the night of liberation. And I talked to him. I wouldn't let him go. And finally, they saw that. They pulled him away. I followed, and my knees gave out, and I fell. They pushed me to a wall. I stood there for 2 hours. Let me just tell you that the pictures that you see in liberation, where people are standing and yelling, hey, hey, liberated the Americans, they're happy, they're jumping. Those are not the Jewish people. The Jewish people were all crawling on their hands and knees if they were still alive. You see, they treated the Jewish people differently than they did the Gentiles. They fed them better, didn't work them as hard. So it was completely different. But people see these pictures, they think we were all so happy. We couldn't jump. We were happy, couldn't jump. Anyway, 2 days later, this man, he asked me how many languages I speak, and I told him. He says, Polish? I'm a Polish Jesuit priest. I came here with monks and nuns and doctors from Paris, and we're opening up a field hospital in the heart of Dachau. I'm going to take you to that field hospital. So he picks me up like a sack of bones. I was 16 and a half years old at the time. I weighed about, 30, 40 pounds. Puts me on his shoulder and he carries me in. And nun came out. She put me on a cot with a white sheet on it. They took my vitals and I pass out. 5 weeks later, I wake up in a monastery in Bavaria, St. Ottilian. That's where I woke up 5 weeks later in St. Ottilian. The monks gave up one building to make it into a hospital for the survivors. To tell you the truth, after I opened my eyes and I was alive again, my whole story just begins. I can't tell you that. That would take hours, but it's in my book, my story. I was going to fight for the country Palestine from where we were dispersed 2,500 years ago by the Romans. That's probably why we wound up in Poland. Anyway, it's a whole story behind it. And the story continues. I met my sister Lola. She was pregnant and she had a little boy. Now our family is expanding. We were now 1, 2, 3, 4 of us. To tell you what happened after liberation, I don't have the power anymore. This is my sister Lola and her daughter and her 2 sons and some of his family. They were Orthodox Jewish people. This is my family. We're now a little more. We are now numbering 22. It started just with me, my sister Lola and I. My only sister, she was an artist. She made all those pictures. Any questions?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I have a million questions, but I'm sure you have talked so much that you probably do not have the energy, and that is totally fine. I have spoken with many people now over the last few years, and that was the most amazing and heartbreaking story that I've ever talked to anybody about. I really appreciate you sharing it with us. I'm sure it must not be easy for you to talk about.
Not easy, but I do it with love. And I am asking everybody to who buy my book from our website, because if you buy it on the internet, we don't get anything out of it. Those are forgeries.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and I will put a link to your website so that listeners can easily find your book and read the rest of your story. Because the fact that you survived that and here you are with us at 96 years old is just absolutely amazing.
I'm very thankful. I believe God is keeping me alive for that purpose, to keep this world from acquiring amnesia. Someone has to talk about it. And there's so few of us left alive, few of us. There are a lot of survivors left, but those are children of survivors, people who hid them and they survived the war. They are survivors, but they didn't go through the camps and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you were my son's age. My son is 13. I could just imagine as you were talking about it, him experiencing those things. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I'm listening and it's heartbreaking. I'm so sorry that you and so many people had to experience that.
I know. Jill, I'm only thing I'm asking of you is that you let as many people hear my story as possible. The more, the merrier.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm going to share it with everybody. We'll get your story out there.
Thank you. But have them buy the audio and a book from us.
I will. I will make sure that it's the direct link to your website so that we can get it there. And then I heard you have a foundation as well.
Yes, I made a foundation called Zachor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. Zachor means remember. And this is what we're doing in the foundation, just what I am doing. And I do a lot of things on my website. You'll find out that we have a curriculum that the whole world can learn from it. The only curriculums written by a survivor. And we have a I Shout Out program. If you shout out for freedom or for love or whatever you shout out on our website, it will remain on our website for generations to come. And if you send a picture with it, your shout out with the picture will come out for generations to come. Nobody has anything like have an AI. Before anyone knew about AI, I had it on my website. You can actually take on your phone, take the AI on your phone, take it home with you and ask me questions and I'll answer.
You could go to our website and we have either on your cell phone or on the computer. And in there we have a section where it says AI, and you could just ask Ben questions and he'll be able to answer directly. So we did it a long time ago, and it's really quite powerful. It's a great learning tool. Matter of fact, your son should do it. Being 13 years old, he's probably starting to learn about the Holocaust now. And yeah, have him go through our website, the zahorfoundation.org, and there we have the curriculum for teachers or anybody to go into it, parents. Everything is free. And we would be honored if your guests that are listen to your podcast and you and your family do the I Shout Out. And you could just get that directly from our website.
You see that
I
little
hyphen shout hyphen out.
you see that little pin says Zachor.
Yeah, I can see it a little. Oh, okay. That's what that says that's at the top there.
Zachor means remember. We have given out over 2 million of these. We're trying to give out 6 million.
We want to give out 6 million of them. We want to have over 6 million shout outs to be the voice for the people that don't have a voice anymore. And so between the pins, actually, I'm going to correct Ben on the pins. It's a little over 1.5 million.
Sorry.
At the end of the war, Ben was weighing about 60, 65 pounds also. So those pictures that you see of the, just bony people, he was one of those.
The Jewish people were happy to be liberated. But what now? What after liberation? They have no home to go to, no family. So they're liberated. What's going to happen now? I mean, we were happy to be liberated, but not like the other people. They had homes to go to, families to meet. We had nobody.
And you ended up in California, though.
I ended up in California, correct. And
Wow.
this is a story in itself, because in California, I ended up on Skid Row on Main Street. I didn't have enough money to buy a cup of coffee, which was 10 cents. And how I was able to turn my life around to make a beautiful life for myself, that's in itself worth reading in my book.
A lot of
Yes.
hard work. He did everything. He did roofing. He did upholstery. I mean, he did whatever could bring in some money. That's what he did. He sold fruit. He started a fruit business. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing. And my husband's a huge history guy, so he's going to get the book now for Christmas because he loves to read books about history. And yeah, so we'll for sure get it. And I know he'll read it and I'll read it and encourage the children to read it.
Yeah, it's very good for the kids. And if Ben is open, if a student wants to call him and ask him questions, if they're doing a special project or something, he's always willing to Zoom with them, talk with them. If they're local in Vegas, he lives in Vegas now. If they're local in Vegas, they come on by. He's an open book.
Wow. It's amazing. Honestly, I'm so grateful for both of you. Gail, you did a lot of work there too, making sure we had all the pictures in time.
I run the foundation, and my niece does it with me also. She does the marketing end of it. It's a
It's
family affair.
beautiful. Yeah, I
We
love that.
promised Ben that the foundation will live on for generations. He already has a great grandson who wants to learn it, and he's going to be 13 soon. He's very involved and knows Grandpa's story, great Grandpa's story, back and forth. The website will live on, and our educating will live on.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad that you did this because, as Ben pointed out, we can't forget. We can't forget that this happened and that there's still a handful of people that are alive that
Yeah.
lived through it and experienced it. And we
And people
like to
say it
think,
never happened. The
wow.
deniers, they say it never happened, and that's just ignorance. When Ben speaks to students, he really talks to them about the choices they make in life. And actually, he has a nice closing that he says to the students. Ben, do you want to do your closing real quick?
Yeah, I say, while individuals can't always choose what happens to them, whether it's a crisis or a calamity, people can choose to either let it ruin their lives or to learn from it and move forward. It's essential to understand the consequences of personal choices. It's possible to let tragedy or trauma become a reason to stop living, but it's also possible to live through extreme circumstances and commit to a life that has meaning, a life that matters.
Oh, that's so beautiful. So beautiful.
And we talk about bullying. And so with students, we go into a little bit more detail about that because they're our future.
Yes.
And they
And
need to learn about things like this young. We used to not want to talk to students until they were in high school. Now we need to teach them in junior high school and even starting at, the higher grades in grade school.
part of me at some points, I was like, I can't believe I'm hearing this because
You
it
know,
just feels so far away.
Growing up, I knew my dad was a Holocaust survivor, but I grew up in Los Angeles and I lived in an area where there were a lot of other Holocaust survivors and their families. But that's it. We never knew his story. I
Mhm.
did not learn his story until in the 90s when he was doing the the tape for Steven Spielberg, the Show Off Foundation. And that's when I learned his story. I laid there on the
Wow.
floor when he was telling his story. And he started speaking because my son was in 5th grade and his teacher wanted a Holocaust survivor to come. That was the first time my dad ever spoke, and he
Oh,
hasn't stopped.
it's amazing. It's beautiful. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And really, thank you to Ben. This was amazing. I am gonna go hug my babies now
Okay.
because I just kept picturing my son as he was talking, and I was like, oh God, oh, it's terrible that people did that.
My dad missed one part that he says a lot, that after the Nazis came marching in down the street, his father sat everybody down and talked to the whole family and said, life is changing today. You're not children anymore. There is no crying. There is no complaining. There is no loud voices. We have new rules that we need to live by. And my dad said his whole life changed in one day.
I'm so grateful that you and Ben took the time tonight to share this with me. It needs to be heard. Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.